And good evening in the UK as it is in my time zone. And this is the second part of the tutorial discussing the Wells class starship. In this one we'll be discussing my bridge officers, my duty officers, and obviously what powers you see in front of you at the moment. Just a quick footnote from my part 1 video that I made a small little error while making the video. What I should have said was that the Tipler cylinder actually comes with Wells class, and the Mannheim device actually comes with a temporal destroyer. And I used obviously the Templar cylinder, on the Wells class. So just wanted to make a very quick correction there before we get started. Okay, for those that know or those that don't know, the Wells class starship is obviously a starship that you pick up from the temporal lockbox. It's one of the possible bonus rewards you can get, and it's actually a very versatile science ship. Um, some people might prefer the other ships in question. There are other ones out there that they can have. I mean, you've just had the Vesta class that's currently just been released. Um, Not really a ship for me at the moment. I haven't decided whether I want to try it or not. I find the bridge officers, for my personal taste, are not quite as flexible. So as such, I'm currently sticking with Wells class. It's doing very, very well for me. And then character-wise, I've sort of revolved the ship and character around temporal warfare. And as such, I kind of like the fact that it's a Wells class ship for time travel, and I'm using weapons that are obviously a temporal nature, such as temporal warfare suite and the anti-proton arrays. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the bridge officers. Now, as for those that know or those that don't know, the Wells class comes with a Lieutenant Commander Universal, a Lieutenant Universal, an Ensign Dedicated Engineer, a full Commander Science, and a Lieutenant Science as well. Now, I dedicate the Lieutenant Commander Universal to Tactical, so I like to have the ship to have a bit of a few more teeth than usual, and I dedicate the Lieutenant Universal to Engineering, and then obviously from there on in the consoles are actually dedicated, so it's obviously then Ensign Engineering, Commander Science, and Lieutenant Science. So then, what do I use? Right then, in my tactical department, I've got the Jem'Hadar Bridge Officer, which for those of you that don't know where that comes from, it's actually from the Cardassian struggle, and it was one of the latest of the Features episode series, and it was from Facility 4028. And one of the rewards you can get is a Jem'Hadar Tactical Officer candidate. Now, his space abilities are actually slightly different to what I'm actually using, in that the beam as a reward you get the beam overload 1, you get the torpedo high yield 2, you get the torpedo spread 3 and beta 3 on the space abilities, and then the ground abilities you get the shroud, which is a bit of a bonus. It's a cloaking device, as well as some handy little bonuses you can get there. And then he's obviously got Photon Grenade 1, Sweeping Strikes 2, Lunge 2, and Smoke Grenade 3. And for those that might be watching the video, you can see someone just decided to overshoot us and vent theta radiation. How nice of them. It's a shame I'm completely ignoring them, so hopefully they'll lose interest. Anyway, moving on. As you can see, Facility 4028, if you want to get the Jem'Hadar officer, very useful. One of the other things to note within the featured episode series of that arc is you can also get a Jem'Hadar ground set as well, which sort of complements the Jem'Hadar officer quite nicely. I actually swapped his abilities over a little bit, and the fact that I kept in the full Lieutenant Commander slot Torpedo Spread 3, mainly because I'm using the Chronoton torpedoes, and I want them to actually have an AoE effect. So I want them to slow down multiple targets, or just one target if need be, if there's only one that presents itself. So I opted for Torpedo Spread 3. Now, some people might favour having high yield there, which wouldn't be a bad idea because the temporal distortion device from the stern actually does favour running the high yield torpedoes, but I choose not to use them. So in the sense that I choose not to use high yield, I use torpedo spread, so I can spread these ones out, although they are very, very slow, so not really quite worth it. But the Torpedo spread does really well on the Chronoton, so I stick with that. Something else to note actually on this ship that, or just in general, that you could use transphasic torpedoes here, the rapid fire transphasics from the Breen featured series. They work very well as well, and you get a decent amount of bleed through damage, which are actually quite good. So always worth bearing in mind that. If you don't know where they come from, they're from the Breen featured series, and they are from Cold Comfort, and they're one of the rewards you can get there. They actually work really, really well additionally with the Breen space set, because you get a bonus with the set for transphasic damage. So they're actually quite useful. They've got a very good recharge time. My memory says just off the top of my head, they're the same as the photon torpedoes. They've got the same reload time. So really good those. You get a 20 plus 20 critical severity and a 10 accuracy. So nothing really that's actually too bad. They're actually quite good torpedoes. They're good for bleed through. If you're running, say, some fleet encounters and you're all using AoE area effect weapons, then the rapid fire transphasic actually does some very useful bleed damage. Very good also on some of the STFs as well, for those targets that are shielded, that is, because you get a bonus 40% shield penetration. So just a little handy tidbit there, I hope. Now, in the lieutenant slot, I use Beam Overload 2. The reason for that is sometimes I want the ship to have a bit more poke, in the sense that they can do a little bit more damage. And the dual beam bank array that I use up front, which is part of the temporal one, so it's the dual chronoton beam banks, they get a bit more of a bump when I use beam overload, and obviously I make sure I pop a weapons battery just to compensate for the power drain that's going to happen as well. Now, I use beam overload rather selectively, because I prefer to favour my targeting subsystems, such as weapons, shields, engines, and auxiliary, because they are more beneficial for science. This tune's actually got a full 9 points in flow capacitors, so this tune makes great use of subsystem targeting. But sometimes in some of the STFs, you just want a sheer bit of damage, a sheer bit of DPS. So it's always handy to have Beam Overload too. I tend to use it if it's not on cooldown from subsystem targeting, to finish an opponent off when their health is pretty much down to 0. And then in the ensign part there, I've got Tactical Team 1 for the shield distribution that you get. Also, just in general, Tactical Team removes a lot of buffs, such as boarding parties. So when the Borg decide to board you in some of the STS, then obviously Tactical Team is the way to get rid of it. So you could also use a Duty Officer, which is I think it's a Transporter Officer. Upon activation of Transfer Shield Strength, there's a chance to reduce boarding parties as well. So that's a handy little one actually to have, especially on the. I've not actually tried it on this particular team, but I have tried it before, and it's actually quite useful, especially if tactical team is down, as in the fact it's recharging. You can use transfer shield strength to remove boarding parties as well. So handy little tip there as well. Now, in the Lieutenant Universal, obviously, as I said earlier, I dedicated it to engineering, and in the ensign there, you've also got engineering officer as well. Now, I'm actually considering doing a little bit of a swap over in powers, but I'm just showing you what I've got at the moment. In the Lieutenant Universal, I've got Engineering Team 1, followed by Emergency Power to Auxiliary 2 to boost my power auxiliary up to the 125 cap, so that I get the most bang for buck when I'm using all my science abilities like Gravity Well and Tychon's Rift and Polarize the Hull, for example. And then obviously in the Ensign Engineering, sorry, I've got Emergency Power to Shields 1. Now, so I'm thinking about swapping this around, moving Emergency Power to Auxiliary over to the Ensign slot there under my Lieutenant Universal, and putting where Auxiliary Power to Auxiliary 2 is at the moment. I'm thinking about putting Emergency to Structural Integrity Field. Mainly because when I hit Tactical Team, which I use more often, this will also take out Engineering Team, because they share a global cooldown. So if I activate it, obviously you can see it's a full countdown there, and then you've got a reduction there as it cools down. And I'm wondering that because I run a higher power level, I'm actually going to get an equal heal if I use Emergency to Structural Integrity. So it's a test at the moment. I haven't decided to do it. If and when I do it, I may make just a very quick amendment to my video. But at the moment, I just wanted to share a possible idea. Now, in the Ensign Engineering slot, I will be keeping the Emergency Power Shields 1, because it's a very handy personal hull heal to my ship. If, for example, I'm busy using Transfer Shield Strength on other fleet mates, or if I have a pug and their shields are low, then I'll pop Transfer Shield Strength on them rather than myself. So emergency powered shields is just giving me a top up to my shields. Although in a science ship, you tend to be able to tank shield, or shield tank, I should say, more effectively. You can't hold tanks; you just don't have the hit points. But yeah, it's more the purview of the cruisers. But still good to keep my shields up. Now in the full commander, I've got tractor beam 1, which I use basically to hold a target or to help take down stationary targets like generators in the STFs. Or even just to hold a ship to reduce their defense value so that I get better hits when I'm hitting a target. And that's the same for if I'm in a team. If I'm holding a target, I'm reducing the defense value. It gives opportunity to hit the targets more. So I like tractor beam. It's quite a useful ability. You can actually enhance tractor beam to drain shields. There's a tractor beam officer that you can get that actually reduces shields as well per pulse. That's quite a handy little feature as well. My cruiser, Operations Odyssey, I swap in and out my polarizer hull for tractor beam sometimes on and off. If I do that, I slot a duty officer that reduces shields as well. So another handy tip there. Then in the Lieutenant Science there, I've got Transfer Shield Strength 2. I favoured 2 rather than 3 because basically I wanted to work out what was best, and tend to find that most people keep the shields up pretty well. So I decided to favour Transfer Shield Strength 2 there. So that's a team and friendly heal. And then in the Lieutenant Commander slot, I've got Hazard Emitters 3, which is a hull heal, and I've got a pretty decent hull heal there, but it also gives you a damage resistance level as well, so quite useful that. It's very good to have that in place. And then lastly in the full commander bit, I've got Gravity Well 3, which is an area effect. And basically this clumps together targets together, and also gives me recharge time to my well, you can see I've got 2 duty officers there that are designed to enhance how quickly my deflector skills come into effect. So hopefully that will make a difference as well. And then lastly, in the lieutenant slot, I've got Polarize the Hull 1 for tractor beam immunity, which I'm not sure if it works correctly or not. I'm still not convinced. I don't know if the game mechanics have changed, if it's a bug, or if they're just working correctly, but I find Polarize the Hull seems to have less and less an effect than it used to. And then last but by no means least, I've got Tychon's Rift 1, which is again another area effect weapon, and it's basically a power drain on targets. And this build resolves around temporal slowing targets down and draining their power. So this ship works very, very well as a support vessel. So that's quite useful there, and it reduces targets' power levels, as you can see there, and also does a kinetic damage over time. So really quite useful, that one. Now, moving on to the other abilities that I use that come with the spec of my ship, well, spec of my toon. Firstly is Sensor Scan 3, which is a damage resistance and stealth debuff and a perception buff to my own character. So basically targets at my current power levels get a minus 58.1 all damage resistance, and then they get a minus to their stealth, and I get a stealth sight as well. You could enhance that stealth sight additionally actually by using the Gemini space set. The deflector gives you a stealth buff for picking up stealth vessels as well. And I've also got a duty officer there that degrades a target's damage capacity, which I'll come into very shortly when we get to the duty officers. Now, another power I use is the Subnucleonic Beam 3, and this one removes all buffs from a target, and it's a minus 66.7% power recharge speed for 30 seconds. So I'm basically draining the ability for a ship to recharge its power quicker. So nice, useful power, that one. It's counterable, but obviously the higher you're spec'ing it, the more it's going to work. And then I've also got now Scattering Field 3, which is basically a plus 85.1 all energy damage resistance rating for 30 seconds and immunity to teleports. So basically popping this, it's an area effect, so it surrounds the ship for a distance. Anyone within that field, not just yourself, but friendly targets as well, will get a buff, so they get, as I said, they get that energy damage resistance. Now, one of the web buffs that I've got that's come with the 3-part Temporal Warfare suite, very similar to the Scattering Field, but this one's very, very useful, slowing targets down, especially if you've got nanite probes coming out your ears. It's got a range of 5 kilometers, And what this does is it gives you a minus 200% flight speed to a target. And if it's a small craft, then you get a minus 400% flight speed. So quite useful if you're coming up against carrier craft ships. Set this power off and it's going to upset their small craft. And you also get a minus 150% power recharge speed as well. So couple that with something like Beam, suddenly your opponent is going to have a lot of trouble getting their power to recharge quickly. Now, something to note that only an extra buff that comes only with either a Temporal Science Vessel or a Temporal Destroyer is when I trick this power off, I get a plus 50% to my flight speed rate, which is very, very useful, especially when I turn the ship to keep the deflector powers on. You get a plus 100% turn rate, so you get 50 flight speed and 100 turn rate, so turn-in's even better. And you also get a plus 150% power recharge speed, so basically all your abilities are going to recharge much, much quicker. So you could do the equivalent of an Alpha Strike with Gravity Well, Torpedo Spread, something like Beam, Sensor Analysis, Scattering Field, swing, fire an aft temporal disruption device, and then spin the ship around and be able to point the four back at the target and be able to fire off another deflector ability such as Tychon's Rift, for example, or any other buff. So it kind of recharges them much quicker. I've had it so I've been even able to launch 2 lots of torpedo spread salvos, which has been really, really useful. So I like that one a lot. And then I've got Photonic Fleet 3, which is part of the skill tree as you rank up through the powers. This basically creates holographic ships that turn up to back you up, basically. Very similar, actually, to the fleet support, but the fleet support only works when your hull gets down to a certain set point, health point, so you can activate that power. It also summons support as well. And then obviously I've got the Quantum Slipstream Drive. I've got the Call Trade Freighter. It's very handy if you're out and about and don't want to go off to a star base. You can call this at summons a freighter in sector space, and you can use your personal account to get hold of spares. Like I sometimes keep a collection of parts and hypos, etc. You can also use the exchange and check your mail from it. If you haven't actually got that console, it's a very easy one to get. Well, it's not the console actually. It's just a little device that sits in your inventory. You don't actually have to slot it. You get it really on in the game. For those of us that have been playing a long time and just probably forgotten to get it, it's actually from the Stranded in Space mission from the Klingon War, and one of the rewards is the Azura personal com code, so quite a little useful one, that one. All my tunes have that. It's quite a useful little thing if you want to get to the exchange quickly and sell some loot off. But for those that didn't know about it, that's where you get it from. And then, of course, there's my ever favourite fireworks, which I use just for well, just for victories really. At the end of the day, if I have a very good STF, then I'll just launch that off as a bit of a celebration. So quite useful that. Now, moving on, I've got Ramming Speed 3, which I very rarely use, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's a very handy way. It sets your flight speed set to 75 for 4 seconds, so it can actually be used just to get you out of dodge, really, quickly get you out of combat, recharge, go back into it. Then there's obviously Abandoned Ship 3, which I don't think I've ever used on any of my tunes, which basically sets a self-destruct for your ship and does 5,100 kinetic damage with a 1 kilometer radius, plus a standard warp core breach damage. So if your hull is just about to go, you might want to pop this while hitting the cube, and if you're a bit of luck, it might take the cube up with you, but I'll be surprised. It's a lot of hit points. Then there's the Temporal Backstep, which is from the Tippler Cylinder, which is basically the equivalent of Miracle Worker, really, for an engineer. And basically, it just rewinds you back in time and gives you a hull heal, shield heal, and yeah, it's the best way to describe it is Miracle Worker, really, just a science version of it. So quite useful. I don't use it all that often, but I think I've used it about twice, and both times I've used it is when I've been momentarily careless, and it has got me out of trouble in the Elite STF. But in PvP, I think you'll still get yourself whacked without too much of a problem. Also, I just discussed fleet support. That's when your health points get to a particular level, and you can summon support. Now, my shield distribution buttons here, this is just one that distributes all shield power evenly through all the quadrants. But I also keep almost a compass point here, which is useful as well for me, just as a visual guidance. I use to boost the forward, aft, starboard, or port shields, as well as my central ones. That's just a personal preference about how I set it up. Then there's the ever favourite Brace for Impact 3, which is the plus 166 kinetic damage resistance for 15 seconds, and the plus 166 crew death and disable resistance for 15 seconds. So pop that if you're going to get hit by a collection of high yield torpedoes. or even torpedo spread, quite useful. The Borg, this is very useful since the invisible torpedo, but it's no overall defense. Probably if you're hit by an invisible torpedo, you're probably going to be dead because it seems to be a one-shot torpedo still. You have useful evasive maneuvers, so it increases your flight speed, strength, and turn rate, plus increases your defense value. Also gets you out of a tracked beam sometimes, or at least makes you a bit more maneuverable when you are under tracked beam. So always handy evasive maneuvers to get you into the position you need to get into very quickly, or just to break combat briefly, pick yourself back up, and then go back into the fight. Then I've got two lots of batteries. I've got weapons batteries because I don't run the highest power level on my weapons. And then there's the old auxiliary battery as another method of boosting my auxiliary power when I want to hit my cap of 125 to make sure that all my science abilities are getting the most value for money really when I'm using them. And then there's the ever faithful enhanced plasma manifold, which you can get from the Oberth science vessel, which is almost like a battery, but it's a plasma manifold. It's an actual console, and that gives you the plus 33 shield power setting for 25.4 seconds, and you also boost your auxiliary by the same plus 33 also for 25.4 seconds, and it repairs disabled shields as well. So quite a little useful one. I tend to alternate between auxiliary power and aux batteries, although sometimes I find myself hitting this. This is kind of one of those ones I click into. If one of these is on cooldown, I can usually just hit that one. And then there's Science Fleet 2, which affects yourself and friends when you're in a team. It's a team shield damage resistance and science skill buff, which gives you a plus 16 starship emitters for 30 seconds and gives you a plus 16 starship power insulators for 30 seconds as well. And it also reduces damage to shields by 33% for 30 seconds as well. So very useful when you're in a team and very useful when you're in the SDFs. And then last but by no means least is the ever faithful subspace field modulator, which is a device that you put into your device slot. And that gives you a plus 34 to all damage resistance for 15 seconds, plus 15 defense for 15 seconds. But as a negative, it gives you a minus 400 proton resistance rating for 15 seconds. But this is quite handy when you're getting engulfed or swamped and your shields are crumbling and you haven't got the opportunity to bring the shields back up quickly enough. Popping this subspace field modulator can usually get you out of trouble quite quickly, so one to remember. So that's the bridge officers and the abilities I'm using. Actually, the subspace field modulator, if no one's out there that's sure where to get it from, it's actually from the Klingon War, and it's actually part of the Davidian featured series. Oh no, Tedlight, I do apologise. Oh, right, there it is. It's from the Skirmish, the Klingon War, and it's one of the rewards there. You can only have one per character. But yeah, Subspace Modulator, very, very useful one. That one definitely worth grabbing. I think anyone can use that really. They'll find it very, very useful. Now, I guess we better go on to the duty officers. I'm going to do the space ones. And currently, I've got one officer in tactical, which is a blue, and that's an energy weapons officer. And this one reduces the time for subsystem targeting to take effect. So it's a 50% chance reduced remaining recharge time by 15. I use that mainly because I do use subsystem targeting a hell of a lot more than I use beam overload. So I want these abilities to come up as quickly as possible, so I like using them. Then the engineer, I didn't opt to have an officer that increased engineering time or increased the recharge time for, or reduced, I should say, not increased, the recharge time for emergency patch shields. What I favoured in my occasion is I picked one of these officers up, and it basically increases the hull repair and shield repair skills for 30 seconds when emergency power to auxiliary is activated. And what that does is it gives me a plus 20 to shield emitters and to hull repair. Now, as a science officer, you're more likely than not spamming emergency power to auxiliary, be it 1, 2, or 3, and probably mainly just 1 or 2, or anyone can use this, really doesn't not science. But if you are going to be using auxiliary a lot, then you are going to very much appreciate that ability because it's giving you obviously the bonus to shield emitters and your hull repair as well, so it's increasing its ability. So I opted to slot that. Now, in the operations side, I've got one sensor officer, and basically this is what this character is doing is it severely degrades a target's damage capacity by 42.9 for 8 seconds when I use sensor analysis. So again, I'm debuffing a target again. So I like this one, and I've got this one slotted in nice, and it works very well for me. And then last but by no means least, I've got two deflector officers. I get all blues again. And this one is a 20% chance to set recharge time to 60% of normal for deflector abilities such as Tychon's Rift and Gravity Well and the Breen Energy Dissipator. So basically it means whatever I'm hitting is going to cool down quicker, so Tychon's Rift and Gravity Well are going to come up much quicker. So primarily you're going to use your deflector abilities quite a lot, so you're going to want those powers to be pretty decent. So that's the Space Duty Officers. And then my last but my name is least, we'll just go for the ground ones briefly. Again, I've got, except for one, they're blues, the last one's purple. And in science, I've got a blue biologist, which basically increases duration and damage debuff and resistance ratings of anisetin gas and tricorder scan by 6 seconds. So it's basically increasing the amount of time that ability works for. And my character uses anisetin gas a lot and tricorder scan a lot, so quite useful, that one. Then in the medical side, I've got a biochemist, which basically not only replicates Ketracel White, so if I use your Jem'Hadar, you can actually replicate that, but you also get a debuff when using most science kits, and you get a -10 to all damage resistance for 60 seconds, so quite like having that slotted, it's quite useful, but it also means I can replicate the Ketracel White as well. And then I've got 2 doctors slotted, which both do the same thing, again blue. When you use a medical tricorder or vascular regenerator, there's a 20% chance of getting 1,300 temporary max hit points for 30 seconds. So I've got 2 of these slotted just to increase my hit points on my characters, just to make them last a little bit longer. Although I do use the Fleet Advanced shields and armor, which help enormously. And then last but by certainly no means least, I've got a nurse slotted, which has a 20% chance to beam down a medic to provide medical support. So basically you get an extra bridge officer that can come down when someone uses the old hypo. And obviously they don't engage in combat, they're a non-combat character, but what they can do is they appear and then they sit there and heal you up while you're in combat, so they'll actually heal you or your allies until their counter is ticked over, and then they'll beam back up to the ship. So quite a little useful on that one. It's actually got me out of trouble now and again, especially when I'm dealing with Atholians, because they are somewhat of a pain to take out. So yeah, that's what I'm using for duty officers for ground and space. So I hope that video has been of use to you. Part 3 is going to be discussing my science officers skill tree and why I've chosen what I've chosen, but I hope that helps you out decide how you want to outfit your science vessel. So I hope you enjoyed this, and part 3 will be to follow up a bit later on. Thank you. Bye bye.